Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to Students of the Word. Today is session number 73, and today we are going to return to paragraph 12 and to the puzzling question of the world. The world, again, just another classic example of one of those pieces of Christian vocabulary that we often use and use in multiple senses without thinking about it. That the New Testament uses the word world in multiple different ways is pretty clear, given the fact that we're all, many of you, may have felt a slight surge of shock or disapproval at the title of my class, that this is a worldly discussion. Like, that's not okay. So the word world is used in world, and worldly especially is used in that way. Um, but of course, we're also just as familiar and comfortable with "For God so loved the world," right? And presumably not worldly things. And we've been kind of seeing both of those things in First John so far. Today we finished last time right in the middle of the kind of the heart of that. So let's look at the English, then we'll go to the Greek. Uh, let's read the whole paragraph. Beloved, do not believe every spirit. I'm gonna go with breath again. Do not believe every breath, but test the breaths to see whether they are from God, because many false prophets have gone out into the world. By this you know the Spirit of God. The breath of God, sorry. By this you know the breath of God. Every breath that confesses that Jesus, the Messiah, has come in the flesh is from God. And every breath that does not confess Jesus, the Messiah, has come in the flesh is not from God. This is the breath of the Antichrist, which you have heard is coming, and now it is already in the world. You are from God, little children, and have overcome them, because greater is he who is in you than he who is in the world. They are from the world, therefore they speak as from the world, and the world listens to them. We are from God. The one who knows God listens to us. The one who is not from God does not listen to us. By this we know the breath of truth and the breath of error. Okay. Um, they are from the world, therefore they speak as from the world, and the world listens to them. Let's take a gander at the other English translations of this before we go to the Greek. Verse 5. They are of the world, therefore they speak of the world, and the world heareth them. Now, the King James here makes it almost sound as if they're talking about the world. They speak of the world. I think they speak of. I think that hits a modern ear differently than it would have hit a 17th century ear. Um, to speak of something nowadays simply just means to talk about something. Um, I think they speak of the world would have had more of the from the world sense in more archaic usage, but still. Okay, let's keep going. NIV, which should not have too much archaic usage. They are from the world and therefore speak from the viewpoint of the world, and the world listens to them. They are from the world and therefore speak from the viewpoint of the world, and the world listens to them. Okay. NRSV. They are of the world. Therefore, what they say is of the world, and the world listens to them. They are of the world. What they say is of the world. So the world listens. Okay. CEV. These enemies, right, because we're interesting that the CEV is the first English translation that is uncomfortable with our vague pronoun. Remember, we were having trouble with this pronoun last time? This is, I think, the same they. Let's peek. They, yeah. Yeah, our no, yeah, our masculine, yeah, exactly. Our masculine plural pronoun. They, yeah. which can't be spirits because spirits is neuter, right? So okay, anyway. But so we've been using just they, like everyone else has just been saying they, but CEV wants to, they're not going to play the pronoun game. These enemies. Okay. So instead they just insert a vague noun. Okay, okay. It's not less vague. It's just a noun. It's not a pronoun. Uh these enemies belong to this world, and the world listens to them because they speak its language. Okay, the enemies belong to this world, and the world listens to them because they speak its language. So they speak its language is sort of the that's what the where we're getting like the parallels. They are from the world and therefore speak from the viewpoint of the world. They are of the world, therefore they speak of the world. They therefore speak they of the world. Um, they are of the world, therefore what they say is of the world. CEV says again, these enemies belong to this world. Huh. So they take that um they're first of all they're turning the pronoun into a noun. Now they're turning the preposition into a verb. I mean, we know how John loves his prepositions, right? I mean, I'm not. I don't think it's just me that loves the prepositions in John. I mean, we get a lot of this. Like John really loves this kind of sentence structure, right? Where he uses a linking verb to introduce a prepositional phrase, right? So he says, "We are of God," for instance, right? So like the operative thing, like the meat of that sentence is the prepositional phrase, which means the whole pivot of that entire sentiment, we are of God, is the pronoun of, right? Now that was just me saying that. I wasn't quoting John there, right? But this is the kind of thing. That's the kind of structure we have seen John use again and again and again, right? Um, Notice the CEV here is yeah, they're doing a lot of paraphrasing for sure. That's what they do. That's what they do. Yeah, as Randall's pointing out. Um, but it's fascinating. It's fascinating to see the patterns. Belong to this world. So belong to that verb, that's their translation of the preposition, right? Where John just says they are of the world, or at least that's what I assume he says, because that's what all the other English translations have said. Um, they're saying they belong, so they're taking the phrase of the world, which could be taken a couple senses, and they're choosing one. By the way, this is a general rule about translations, and it's something that I think a lot of people don't like recognize sort of intuitively, but it's a really important thing to notice. And that is when you're doing a translation, the more you say, the less you say. That is, the more you try to spell out and make clear the meaning, the more you are forced to choose between potential meanings. Right. So, I mean, this always happens. I mean, anytime you're translating from one language to another, a word can mean two things, or a phrase could have one sense or it could have a different sense. You're often forced to choose. Um, but the more you try to explain, the more you narrow that, and therefore the more you exclude potential other things. This is my particular issue. This is why I don't love these kinds of paraphrase translations. They seem to say more because they kind of dig in a little deeper, right? One could easily look at this translation and say, well, see, look, that makes it so much clearer, right? And it does in one sense. It does in the sense that what it says, it is saying more plainly, it is saying more forcefully. Um, and yet it's saying less in that there are multiple ways to take that prepositional phrase, and it's choosing, right? Um, yeah, Randall, this is one of my gripes about the NIV too. But yeah, exactly. As Jackie says, it says more if they're right. Right. Yeah, exactly. But I think, see, that's the thing, especially with somebody like John. Yeah, especially with somebody like John. With somebody like John, he's I don't I would be very surprised if he intended only one possible single way to take these particular prepositional phrases. Um, but yeah, yeah. Oh my goodness, Stephen, it is so true. Anytime you're translating something, like Stephen is talking about Japanese manga, for instance, when you've got like wordplay going on, and the Japanese humor loves wordplay, he says, and it often doesn't translate well. That is absolutely true. Whenever you've got, and by the way, that's so relevant to biblical translation as well. It's one of the things that I've been learning more and more is the way in which, especially in Hebrew, like Genesis is just full of wordplay. But not just Genesis, like the whole Old Testament is all full of wordplay, where they'll take and they'll riff on a particular word and anyway, it's uh and even do the thing where they'll, because you know how Hebrew doesn't have vowels, right? It's just the consonants and then the the like Tengwar, right? The 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 jots and tittles, right? That tell you what the vowels are. So Hebrew will even do that thing where it doesn't just use homophones, like it will use homophones and stuff like that sometimes, but it'll take like two words which are different words, but they use the same consonants, right? So that like visually they look almost exactly the same, but they're not the same, right? So and you can have a different sort of color of wordplay or a different flavor of wordplay with two words like that than when you have like two actual homophones and stuff. They're doing that kind of thing all the time, and it almost never translates. It's really, really hard to translate, and you just often like lose it completely, um, which is uh, which is hard. But anyway, I'm sorry. I'm this is as always. I'm not trying to just pick on the CEV here. The reason I wanted to go through is I want us to be trying to understand what he's saying about the world and its relationship with the enemies, because again, we get world a whole bunch of times here, right? Twice in this one sentence. And and as we can see, this is another one of those times where John's doing his prepositional phrase thing, he's doing his parallel structure thing. Um, uh, and it's hard to understand. So I want to see how other people did it. Okay, wait. So these enemies belong to this world, and the world listens to them because they speak its language. Okay, that's really interesting. All right. Now, the most paraphrasy of all, kind of love the message. Okay. Going down to verse 5-ish. These people belong to the Christ denying world. They talk the world's language. Okay, right. So we got that same idea. And the world eats it up. But we come from God and belong to God. Okay. The world eats it up because they talk the world's language. Yeah. These people. Yeah. Notice though, the two, both of the maximally paraphrasy ones, right? The CEV and the message, both ditch the ambiguous pronoun, right? But neither one of them is very specific. Like they don't go back and talk about I assume lying preachers is what they said instead of false prophets in the message. And in the CEV, they called them false prophets. Yeah. Okay. So instead of just repeating that, like they're not like absolutely taking a stand on who the pronoun is pointing to, right? Um, they're not out and out saying it's totally the false prophets, right? Um, but anyway, these enemies and these people, right? Um, yeah, the false teachers. Okay. Um, anyway, all right. Okay, sorry. I don't get distracted. I'm not here to critique translations, but it is fun and it is interesting. Okay, but now let's go back to the Greek. Okay, let's see what John actually says. They Altoi. Still, right, we checked this. Still the masculine plural. Um, you are from God and have overcome them, right? That was the problem. This was the problematic them, who exactly we were claiming victory over, right? And grammatically speaking, we were thinking it's kind of got to be the false prophets, as that's the only masculine plural noun in arm's reach here, right? In this whole paragraph to this point. So, and it makes a certain amount of sense because they're the themes that we of the, what we started talking about, right? Many false prophets have gone out into the world is sort of like the topic sentence of this paragraph. So, okay. Anyway, so let's assume it's the same they. They ek to cosmo. Okay, so that's really interesting. So we were just noticing that at the end of verse 4, at the end of our last sentence, we were looking at the phrase entocosmo, in the world, and noticing the balance between, we've got en human and entocosmo, in you, in the world. And the in here seems to be like the in of abiding, as far as we can see, right? There is one who is abiding in us, that God is abiding in us. John has said many times, right? That is assuming that we're abiding in him. But anyway, God's abiding in us. And something else, such as it might be the spirit of Antichristo, is abiding in entocosmo, in the world. But now we immediately shift from entocosmo to ectocosmo, which even the interlinear translates as of the world. But that's not of the world. That's ek. And we know this one. He's used this all the time. I mean, he was just doing this. Humes ek tu theo. You are out of God, from God, derived from God. Ek tu theo, same exact phrase. Twice he's used it. Whether they are, let's just go back here, right? Right, beloved, don't believe every breathing, but test them whether they are ectutheo. Gotta check whether those breathings are ectutheo, from God, because there are those false prophets that have gone out eis ton cosmon, into the world. And tuto, by this the Spirit of God. Every spirit that confesses that Jesus Messiah have come in the flesh is ectutheo. And every breathing that does not confess that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is not ectutheo. Okay. So again, like this whole paragraph, so ectu has been, that prepositional phrase has been at the heart of what he's been talking about. Is it from God or not? That's why we're supposed to test the breathings. Where is it from? Where's it ek? Right? What's it out of? This is that thing, breathing, presumably spirit of the Antichristu, which you heard is coming, and now it is entocosmo already. You are ectutheu, just like this breathings that testify that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh, right? We're ectutheu, and that's like an ectutheu sandwich, because we started off but yes, we're doing a test to see whether they're from God. And we are, fortunately, right? We got to test the spirits if they're from God. If they confess Jesus come in the flesh, they're from God. If they don't confess it, they're not from God. But we are from God. Okay. You are ectutheu, technia, and you've conquered probably the false prophets, masculine pronoun, masculine plural, because greater is the one who is in you than the one who is in the world. So you've got where you're ek, where you're from, what you're derived from. And yeah, Randall, I know we've talked about this phrase a whole bunch because we've seen it a whole bunch, right? As Randall says, there seems to be a kind of play between the two primary meanings of the preposition ek, which one is out of in a spatial sense, like the opposite of go into, right? To go out of the house is one primary meaning of the ek, right? You're in a space and you're leaving it, right? And from indicating the source of something. Yes. And one of the way in which those two meanings kind of merge, as we've discussed before, Randall, is in the parental, so the ancestral sense, right? Like we God is our source, right? God is our parent. Um, so And this, of course, is important because this was established in paragraphs 9 and 10, right? With the children of God and children of the devil. Some are ectu Theo and some are ectu Diabolo or ectu Panera, the evil one, right? So, okay, so again, like ectu, we know about ectu. He's been using this prepositional phrase all over the place. And yet, when we come to verse 5 and we get it again, ectu, ectu cosmo. Both of the, yes, we do get, as I was detecting, right, as we're suspecting, looking at the English translations, we're suspecting that he was doing a parallel prepositional phrase thing, like John so loves to do. They are from the world and therefore speak from the viewpoint of the world, says the NIV. They are of the world, therefore speak they of the world, says the King James. They are from the world, therefore they speak as from the world, says the NASB. Yes, they are ectu cosmo. Dia tuto, because of this. Now, dia, that's just straight up causality. Right? I know we've spent a lot of time with like hina and hoti, right? And hot, and those just mean that, right? And sometimes hoti that can mean a like because of that, like it can indicate causality, right? We've seen this a whole bunch of times. But dia is just that, isn't that just, am I right in remembering that's just a straight up, this is it's a causal thing right there? Right, literally through. Yes, right. Okay, I do remember this before. So the literal sense of dia is through something, right? So yes, it doesn't this is like by means of. Yes. By means of this, ek tu cosmo lalusin, they speak ek tu theo. That is a fascinating phrase. Because of this, through this, they speak ek tu cosmo. And Hokosmos, Kai Hokosmos, and the world, auton akue, listens to them, hears them. Okay, hang on. Hear, listen. Yeah, that's not helpful. I'm just guessing here. Okay. I'm trying to just to figure out if like because in my vocabulary here and listen are kind of different words, right? Um. Ooh, interesting. Hang on. Before I get too distracted with akue, Randall is telling me that when dia is used with the accusative, which it is being doing here. Okay, so when it's used with the genitive, it means by means of. But when it's used with the accusative, it means on account of. So it really is straight up causality. Okay. Yeah. Okay, great. So this is a strong causal statement. Now, what exactly is causing what? They are ectu cosmo. which may be similar to ectu diabolu, but I'm pretty sure it's different from ectu theou. They are ectu cosmo. They ectu cosmo esin. Again, see, there's your classic example, right, of John doing that thing. They linking verb prepositional phrase, right? He loves that. He loves that. Um, okay. They are ectu cosmo. Because of this, what the heck is this? What is tuto? What does tuto point to? It's a demonstrative pronoun. Demonstrative pronouns point. What's it pointing to? Because of this, what? Because of what? Because they're of the world? Because they're of the world, they speak of the world, right? So it's explaining, why do they speak ectu cosmo? Well, because they are ectu cosmo. That's why, right? Yeah, Randall points out that the demonstrative pronoun. Thank you, Randall. As you can see, I am like not accustomed to this. Randall is continuing to bring me back to the actual facts of what we can discern rather than guessing. That is, note he is want to point out to me the gender of the preposition, and the gender is neuter, which means it probably refers like back to what he's been saying, and sometimes can refer to like vaguely like all the stuff that he's been saying, right? um but it seems to me likely that it's pointing to the first half of the sentence. They are of the world. Because of this, they speak ectu cosmo. So they are ectu cosmo and they speak ectu cosmo. And I'm just looking to make sure. No, there's no differences. They're literally the same phrase, ectu cosmo. Everything about them is identical. They are it and they speak it. Ectu cosmo. Okay, before we get back to listening again, let's look at this verb. Tell me about speaking. Laleo. Pretty. While he was saying, man spoke. What are you to say? And you, right, don't think in that hour what you're gonna say, for it's not you who speak, it's right. Okay, the spirit of your father speaks. Right, we're talking about the Holy Spirit here. And the mute man spoke. How can you, being evil, speak what is good? For the mouth speaks out of the right of the that which fills it. Um, okay. Yeah, wow. So this is the, like, whenever Matthew says he said, it's this verb, basically. Jesus spoke another parable. Jesus spoke to the crowds. Look, the dumb is speaking. Well, he was yet speaking. Okay. Yeah, wow. All right. So this is the super generic word for talking. Yes. Randall says that he guesses it was originally onomatopoetic. Laleo. Yeah. Yeah, I bet you're right. Um, sorry, I'm wanting to just jump ahead quickly, as is my wont, to the Gospel of John. Just see how often he uses it. I don't want to just judge by Matthew. I say to you, we speak of what, right? Here's something that's relevant. Uh, that which from the earth speaks of the earth, which God has sent speaks the words of God. I who speak to you am he. That he'd been speaking with a woman. Why do you speak to her? No one was speaking openly. Okay. So this is, what I wanted to just double check to make sure here is I wanted to see if this particular word, because there are lots of words for talking, right? Um, I mean, like I can say I spoke to him, I can say I lectured him, right? I could say I preached to him, I could say, I cajoled him, right? There are lots of words I could use to describe my speech act. And I wanted to see if this verb was like even something as simple as the difference between speak and told. Um, speak and tell. But this is like the he said verb, right? It looks like, as far as I can tell, the simple, most generic word for talking. Because my goodness, it's everywhere. Every time they're saying, I have spoken unto you. Yeah. Goodness, look at that. John uses this word like 15 times in John 16. Yikes. Okay. All right. I'm convinced. Super generic. No problem. Okay. So what does that mean? It's one thing when John does his linking verb prepositional phrase thing. They are ectu cosmo. That is, and by doing so, what he does, I mean, what linking verbs do, right, is they just take a subject and they take a predicate and they just like, boom, you sort it out, right? Give me an action verb and I'll tell you how these two things are related. But with a linking verb, I'm just kind of chucking them together and then handing them over to you, right? That's kind of what linking verbs do, right? And in this case, in this kind of a structure, what John is doing is he's taking the noun, the subject, and then with his linking verb, he's connecting them to a prepositional phrase. I want you to be thinking about. And again, it's like how he, when he does his favorite, it's almost like when he does his that other really fun structure that he loves so much, the present participle one, right? Instead of saying something like, uh, the people who keep his commandments. And remember, remember how John would say that, right? Instead of John saying the people who keep his commandments, he would say the keeping the commandment ones, right? Um, yeah. Anyway, okay. Because of this, they speak from out of the world. Ektuthea. See, and I'm just like, again, I don't want to be harsh or throw stones, but for real now, within this one sentence, we have this same exact prepositional phrase two times. Ectu cosmo, ectu cosmo. And the interlinear translation translates it differently. Of the world and from out of the world. It's the same phrase. Come on now. Help us see that. Don't get in the way of it. Okay. They are ectu cosmo. Because they're ectu cosmo, they speak ectu cosmo. So now we don't have a linking verb. Now we've got an action verb. The first time the phrase, the prepositional phrase, ectu cosmo, is used to identify them. What are they? They are ectu cosmo. It's who they are. What do they do? No, not what do they do? How do they do it? Right? Because the second time, when he says they speak ectu cosmo, now ectu cosmo sounds like an adverb, has an adverbial force, it would seem. Right? They speak ectu cosmo, ectu cosmoily. Right? Um, doesn't that make sense? That's the difference between having a linking verb, asine, are, and having an action verb, La Lucine. They speak here. They are of the world. That's who they are. Because that's who they are. This is how they talk. And that's important because what have we been talking about the whole time? This whole paragraph has been about what they talk. It's all about the breathing. Those false prophets who've been let loose in the world. Many false prophets have gone out into the world. Ice, remember that's the opposite of X. Ice, into the world. The false prophets have. But we've got to test these breathings because you just can't tell, right? By this, you know the breathing of God. Every breathing that says the same thing as Jesus the Messiah has come in the flesh is ectu theou. So the whole thing is about determining what the breathings are, the speakings, the talking. They're talking ectu theou. From the world, out of the world, derived from the world. They're speaking as the child of the world. I'm thinking of the phrase ectu in the same way we've seen him use that prepositional phrase repeatedly in the last 3 or 4 paragraphs, right? I mean, he has really leaned into this prepositional phrase, right? This familiar ground for us, ectu. And those are the forces that he's been giving it. We are ectu theou in the sense of God is like we are the children of God. Notice how he's emphasizing that, right? I mean, he just said that. You are ectu theou. Humes ectu theou este technia, little children of God, because you're from God, because God is your parent and you're derived from God. So again, notice how he establishes the parallel. There are 2 things that are ectu theou in this paragraph. There's the breathings, the ones that homologon, the one that say alike with the confession about Jesus coming in the flesh. Those breathings are from God. And what else is from God? Us, right? Yeah. So those breathings come from God just as we come from God. God is their source as God is our source in the sense of being our parents. We're technia. We're little children, the little children of God, right? We're God's little toddlers. We're God's seed, as he said in paragraph 9. Why? Because God's seed is in us, obviously. Okay. Going back to John's, I say he's been leaning into the ectu phrase, which is totally true, right? But I still certainly do not think that the preposition ek has unseated John's favorite preposition, which is still en, right? I still say that the epistle is brought to you by the preposition en, in. But ek is becoming a strong second favorite here. Okay. So in that same sense that he's been saying derived from, has its origin in, the breathings come from God. We come from God because we're God's technia. We're God's little children, right? So they are ek to cosmo. They're from the world. And they talk from the worldly. They talk in a from the world manner. They speak in a from the world manner. Their breathings are from the world. It's an absolute recapitulation of what he said before about the breathings, some of which come ectu theou and some of which do not come ectu theou. And remember I was saying at the time that that felt a little bit odd, that he carried the parallel through in verse 2 and verse 3 so fully and so exactly, word for word, except adding the word not, right? Instead of giving us an opposite. This one comes from God, and this one is ectu theou, and this one is ectu Panero or ectu diabolu or something else, even ectu cosmo, right? What's the other side? If it's not ectu theou, then where's it from? And he didn't say that. He didn't give us that originally in verses 2 and 3. He just said ectu theou and not ectu theou, right? And it left us kind of asking at that point, well, if not ectu theou, then where's it ectu, right? Where's it from? And now he's answering that question. They speak ectu cosmo. That's where their breathings are from. Their breathings are from the world. They are from the world, and their breathings are from the world. Their speaking is from the world. Their enormously generic verb for talking, everything they say, is from the world. This is, of course, this is the place where some of our English translations were rendering it, they speak the world's language, remember? I don't think that's a bad translation. That seems to kind of get at something that John is saying here. But I think that it's broader than that. And I think the problem is what we started this paragraph wrestling with, which is the verb, the noun spirit, right? If we, as I've been trying to do, if we get out of the habit of just hearing demon when we hear spirit, like it's either Holy Spirit or demon, right? Don't believe every spirit. That is every spiritual being that talks to you. Um, as we spent quite some time talking about before, I don't think that's what John's discussing in this paragraph at all. And I'm getting more and more convinced of that all the time. And I think that verse 5, we see him coming back and saying it exactly the same thing again. They are ectu cosmo. You are ectu theou. They are ectu cosmo. And because of that, when they talk ectu cosmo. Their breathing is ectu cosmo. That's the answer to the implicit question, at least the question that I had after verse 3. If the breathings don't confess that Jesus, the Messiah, has come in the flesh, where are they from? Answer, ectu cosmo. That's what the speaking is. Because of this, ectu cosmo lalusin, kai ho cosmos auton akue, and the world listens to them. They are of the world. Because of this, they talk. They are from the world, therefore they talk from the world, and the world listens to them. The world hears them. So this is going back now to what I was thinking when I was looking at akui. Akuo. Um, I'm not a big fan of. I guess here, listen. I really like that English distinction between to hear and to listen. It's not that we're 100% consistent in our usage with it, but it looks like it's pretty vague. This looks pretty generic too. Look how many times the word "hear" is used in the Sermon on the Mount. Every time you have heard that it was said, that's this one. Um, yeah, Randall says it can also extend to the sense of heed. That's what I was afraid of, Randall. That's not what I wanted to hear. That's the distinction I enjoy in English between hear and listen. Um, but I'm looking at how it's used. Yeah, there you go, right there, Randall. Um, yes, they will not heed your words. Yep. Um, the deaf hear. If you have ears to hear, let him hear. Let anyone hear his voice. Yeah. When the Pharisees heard this, oh yeah, it's everywhere. Holy cow. It's even more places than the said word. But let's glancing up at John. Yeah, this gets used everywhere. Good dozens of times in Matthew. Oh my God, I can't even scroll down far enough to get to John. Okay. Wow. All right. His disciples heard him speak, and the two who heard John, yeah, that you hear the sound, he stands and hears him. He has seen and heard of that, he testifies. Pharisees heard that Jesus was over there. Yeah. When he heard that Jesus had come, I say to you, he who hears my word, the dead will hear the voice. Those who are in the tombs will hear his voice. As I hear, I judge. Who can hear it? Yeah. Okay. Yes. John uses it. This seems to be all of the gospel writers go to generic. I have experienced, I have had an acoustic experience, especially of somebody's voice. Yes. When they heard. So, um, Randall, I wonder, do you think the use of here, a generic audio perception now verb like this seems to be an audio perception verb, um, do you think that this gets infected? Infected. I don't mean it in any kind of pejorative sense. Uh, inf do you think that they're importing any of the Hebrew use? Because in Hebrew, listen is an important verb, right? Like "Hear, O Israel," in the Shema, or like when they repeat it twice, like if you listen, listen, um, which means to heed, right? So that play on merely hearing and actually listening, right? Um, and they often in Hebrew, as I understand, will do that by doubling the verb, right? Um, so when uh, God will sometimes, like in the prophets, will be like, if you hear what I say, right? Meaning if you hear it and you really, you really hear it. And I'm wondering if they're kind of importing um that in. Yeah, Devore, it's exactly like saying I don't like him, but I like him. Yes. It's oh, okay, not exactly the same, but kind of the same. Kind of the same. Yes. The extended meanings are there in classical Greek too. Okay, well that's what I was wondering if that was a Hebrew importation or if it's just something that Hebrew and Greek shared. Okay, interesting. All right. So we have learned that these two verbs that he's using in this, the speak and the hear verbs, are the most generic verbs of their kind. Um, so he's not, yeah, okay. They speak ectocosmo and the cosmo and the cosmos listens. Right. Difference because cosmos is nominative there. It's the cosmos doing the listening. Now, somebody such as it might have been Devora. Yes, it was you, Devora. Um, we're talking about the cycle, right? They're coming out of the world and they're also going into the world, right? Thinking of the way that we got the false prophets going ice to Cosmo into the world here, and now saying that they're ek to Cosmo, they're from the world. Um, and so they came out of the world and they also went into the world. It's the whole idea of everything returning to its source, possibly in some sense. Um, yeah, Devora, I think that's true in the sense of the kind of dichotomy that he was building, right? Look at the way that he was kind of like boiling people down to like, are you ectu Theo or ectu Diablo, right? Thus, there are children of God and children of the devil, right? Children of God and children of the accuser. And I think it's the same sort of thing here. Why did they go into the world? Well, because that's where they're from, right? And remember the link that we made way back ages ago when we started this paragraph, this thorny and difficult paragraph. I didn't expect this paragraph to be such a challenge, but it's been a very different kind of challenge, hasn't it? The whole spirit thing and then whatever. Anyway, um, but remember, we have to recall paragraph 7, right? They went out from us, but they were not really of us. For if they had been of us, they would have remained with us, but they went out so that it would be shown that they were not all of us, right? So this going out, that's where they came from. Like, how did they get to the world? Like if you've gone into something, you've left one thing and you've gone into somewhere else. You've left one space and you've gone into one space, right? If the cosmos, if the world space is where they've gone into, where they come from, well, us, right? They went out from us and went into the world. Why did they do that? Well, just the reason that he said back in paragraph 7. What was made manifest by the fact that they went out from us? Well, that they were never actually of us in the first place. Why did they go into the world? Devora, just as you suggest, because that's where they're from, right? Because they're Ectu Theu. I'm sorry, they're not Ectu Theu, because they're Ectu Cosmo all along, right? Um, and so, of course, it should be no surprise that he says that the spirit, the breathing of the Antichrist is en to Cosmo, is in the world already. The spirit, the breathing of the Antichrist is the breathing of the false prophets. Their breathing, their speaking is ectu Cosmo, not ectu Thea. It is, so we're, um, yes. And Randall, thank you for, pointing that. Yes, exactly. Um, uh, Randall's recalling the inns, the abiding inns in verse 4. You are ectu Thea and have overcome them because greater is the in you one than the in the world one. Notice how he's using the prepositional phrases as like adjectives there, right? But like freestanding adjectives because he doesn't even use nouns, right? The in you one and the in the world one. Something is abiding in you. Something is abiding in the world. So yeah, that I think most clearly again brings us back to the pairing. I think it brings us back uh to Theo and Diabolu, God and the accuser. I think it brings us back to the Holy One and the Evil One. I think it even, in a sense, if we think back, think being put into a paragraph 7 frame of mind, back to the anointing and the anti-anointing, the antichristoi, anti-anointing thing. this kind of pairing, this kind of dichotomy he's been talking about all along. And so, yes, Randall, we do have this implicit relationship between them, the false prophets, the ones whose speaking is from the world, and the one who is in the world, the one who is abiding in the world. Yes, implying that being of the world is indirectly the same as being of the one who is in the world. Yes, and that seems less small, that it seems less of a leap, right? It seems just all the smaller of a leap since he's already used the phrase ectu diabolu and ectu panero before, right? He's already pointed that he's this just it just recalls that, right? That again, that does not, I agree with you. That absolutely does not seem to me like any kind of a leap. But notice then notice the place that this puts the world, the concept of the world. If we now back up and try to finish what I started trying to do, understand the noun world, the sense in which he's using the word world. We have these three things in alignment, right? The false prophets, the false prophets, the world, and the one who is in the world. The anti-anointed one, the antichristo, who's probably also the diabolo, the accuser, and the panero, the evil one. Right? All of these things are oriented together. Remember, we got another connection established between those by nene ke kate. Remember that? Overcome. Back to our poem. No, our poem. I'm writing to you, young men, because you have overcome the panero, the evil one. Yes. And now we're overcoming the false prophets. We're overcoming them, the false prophets. So again, all of these things he's sort of aligning together. Scott, you were saying last week that you wanted to talk a little bit more, and I could do more, and this is going to be a pitiful attempt. We can do better and more as we keep going. But you were asking me to talk more about when I said at the end of class last time, we don't want a flow chart. He's not trying to clarify and make fine distinctions. He's overlaying things. This, what I'm getting at here, this is one of those examples, right? We don't need a flow chart to tease out the relationship between the different nouns and concepts that he's connecting here. False prophets, breathings of the false prophets. Let's just forget breathings for now. False prophets, antichristo, Cosmo, Panero, Diablo. Right? So we've got these five things all that he's associating together. Is he like trying to keep and to establish and maintain fine distinctions between those things? No, I don't think so. He is not just juxtaposing. To juxtapose something means to put two things next to each other, and he's not putting them next to each other, he's overlapping them. False prophets have gone into the world because they're from the world. Just like you're from, so the repetition of the ectu phrase, ectu diabolo, ectu panero, ectu cosmo. Okay, so now he's inviting us, he's overlaid those two terms from the accuser, from the evil one, from the world. How are those things alike? He's stated that they are because of the parallel that he's established there, right? Again, think about how he um, talks about us being opposed to the false prophets who are associated with the world, which is also associated with the spirit of Antichrist. And the world also has one, presumably the evil one, or the yeah, presumably the evil one, or um uh the accuser, right, abiding in it. So he layers all these things, and he's not trying to make distinctions. We want to split things apart. It's how we think, right? We want to put things into neat piles, and we kind of like flowcharts, right? So that we can follow step by step. John's desire is not to separate, but to heap together. So just consider, for instance, what we were just considering. Think of what we were just considering as an illustration of this, the relationship between the false prophets and the world. They've gone into the world, and the world is listening to them. So in one sense, the world is the target and the audience of the false prophets. But the world is also the source of the false prophets. They're ecto cosmo, and they talk ecto cosmo. And it's because of that. It's because they're ecto cosmo that they talk ecto cosmo, and that the cosmos listens to them. And again, we want to be like, okay, we want to draw equal signs between things, and we want to clarify things. John doesn't want us to do that. John wants us to meditate on what the relationship between the false prophets, this concept of the world, which is right there in the middle of both. It is that place where the false prophets go out into. It is the place that it is the thing from which the false prophets are ultimately derived. It's the place where the Antichrist abides, but it also listens, heeds the word, absorbs the spirit, the breathings of the false prophets. It's both associated with the evil one, but it's also, and the world listens to them. Potentially, if we think of that other way in which the word cosmos is used rather, that final phrase is a little bit tragic. The world listens to them. You know, the cosmos that Jesus came to be the propitiation for, way back in paragraph 2. The cosmos that God so loved that he gave his one and only son. That cosmos. Because there is one sense in which the cosmos just means all the people collectively. All people. That seems to be where the false prophets have gone out into. That seems to be who's going to listen to them. And yet at the same time, in a different sense, the false prophets are from the world. Because let's go back to paragraph 6. Do not love the world, nor the things of the world. Hang on. Let's do the Greek. Because I want the prepositions. I don't trust the prepositions in the translations. I want John's prepositions. Okay, I have written, there's our poem. Okay, here we go. Me agapate. Don't love ton cosmon. Don't love the world. accusative, direct object. It's what we're not supposed to love. Nor the in the world stuff. Of course. Of course, that's what John said. No noun. Why use a noun when you can use a prepositional phrase? The in the world stuff. Don't love the world. This is plural. This article is plural. So we couldn't translate this don't love the world or that thing that is in the world, like the Panero. Yeah, it's plural. So it's stuff. Don't love the world or the stuff that is ento cosmo in the world. Again, Scott, see there? There are things that are in the world. There's also one who abides ento cosmo in the world, right? Should give you pause about those things in the world, those in the world stuff, right? If anyone should love ton cosmon, if you should heart it, agapa, remember that really generic verb, is the love of the Father is not in him. And hey, he doesn't do the preposition, the participle thing. He doesn't say like each of the loving the world ones or something like that. No. If anyone, this is a genuine pronoun, isn't it? Interrogative pronoun, yeah. That's cool. Okay. If anyone should love the world, the love of the Father is not en auto. So we had in the cosmos stuff, and now we've got the love of God, which should be is in somebody who does love. If you love the things that are in the cosmos, the love of God is not in you. So now we've got entocosmo and en auto, and the love of God being in him. So you love the cosmos, God's love is not in you. Hoti. That. Because panto ento cosmo. All that in the world stuff. Again, nouns, where John goes, we don't need nouns. Yeah. Okay, and this is singular. This is singular. Toe. Panto. Wow. All the things, individual things in the world. Oh, right, because he's going to list the things, the individual things. The desire of the sarkos, the desire of the ophthalmon. And this, JJ, is where you made that awesome observation that this is recapitulating the sin of Eve. So good. So absolutely right. As soon as you said that, I became absolutely 100% convinced that that's what John was thinking of here. It's good for food, and it looks nice. And the Alazonia, the pride of Bayou. Yeah. Uk is not ek to patros. Oh, look at that. Is not ek to patros. But ek to cosmo, Estine. Yeah. So, because all panto ento cosmo, all each of those things that is in the world is not ek to patros, but ek to cosmo. Kai and whole cosmos, the world, paragetai, it's passing away, like the darkness. a couple paragraphs before. And the epithemia, the desire of it. Yes. The desire of it. Does that mean your desire for the, like, you want the world, or a desire that comes from the world, a desire that is ecto cosmo, or both? Why choose? The one, however, poion, doing, the thelema, the will to theo, thelema to theo, the will of God, mene, abides, eis ton aeona, abides to the age. Okay. So this is our first big, we had the one reference in paragraph 2 about Jesus coming to be the propitiation, and not for our sins only, but for the sins of the whole world. Right? That was the big conclusion of paragraph 2. Right? Um, and this was the first time we got a real contemplation from John about what the world was. And this first one is all about love and desire for the world, stuff that's in the world, and its opposition to the love of God. But I would, in the context of our discussion up here in paragraph 12, the one that jumps out to me, the all that is in the hoti pan to ento cosmo, because all that stuff, all that in the world stuff, is not ek to patros, but ek to cosmo, which is the same dichotomy that he's doing in paragraph 12. The breathings, are they ek to patros? Or are they ek to cosmo? Right? So now he circles back and he's not using patros here, right? But he's already used it before. So just as we're taking Antichristo and Cosmo and false prophets, right? The lying prophets, and the Panera and the Diabolo, right? Which were all being kind of overlaid with each other. Now he's also overlaying Theo and Patro as well. He's already opposed the world to the Patro, the Father. And of course, he's talking about Theo. Ectu Theo is that parental sense as well, right? As we get explicitly, you are ectu Theo, technia, little godchildren, right? So yeah, so we should be remembering the ectu patro, and see that he is overlaying Theo and patro and Holy One from paragraph 7 as well as against the Panero. Um, uh, yeah, yeah. So Scott, I don't know if that's an explanation. I'm just trying to kind of make explicit what's happening here. And I really, and it's so hard. It's like, back when we were looking at the CEV, right? These enemies belong to the world, and the world listens to them because they speak its language. And it's so tempting to the, like, it's, or no, not use the word, the language of temptation. Let me say instead, it is so natural to the way we think to ask the question, so is that right? Is that what John really meant in that sentence? I talked about how it's kind of narrowing the meaning, right? Um, and um, but it's not really the right question as much as we would want it to be. It's really not. Um, and honestly, I think there are so many problems within the church, between the church and non-believers. There's so many problems that are caused by our desire to find the right answer, to not, to just, to resist the Bible's repeated insistence that we kind of put these things on top of each other and sit there and meditate on them in the sort of their fullness and richness. Um, and Scott was just saying it's tempting to want to draw a line between one statement and the effect causing the next line. Yeah, now, don't get me wrong, he is making causal statements, right? I mean, so that's why that's why I pay so much. So you remember my two favorite my two favorite categories of words in the Greek are the prepositions and um the relative pronouns, like the that's and the hoties and the hinas and the dias, right? The the words which connect clauses and sentences to each other, right? Because those do matter a great deal, right? Um, what John is doing is not exactly like a sort of a mathematical proof. He's not exactly saying, like, let me clarify my terms and then let me work out those terms clearly and consistently in order to bring you very plainly to a particular place. He's not doing that. But at the same time, he's not just spouting aphorisms, disconnected statements, right? He's not doing that either. Now, that happens sometimes. Proverbs is kind of like that, right? Yeah, John isn't Paul. Stephen, I agree. Um, Paul would link things together in a clear chain of argument that shifts metaphor like 5 times over the course of one paragraph. Oh, I uh I love Paul's wild freedom with his metaphorical regimes. But anyway. Um uh Yeah, that's how Paul would do it, right? But that's not how John is doing it. But again, it's not to say, and Scott, this is important, right? I don't want you to feel completely, I'm not trying to unmoor you completely from like logical parsing of it, right? That's not the point at all. Um, Again, he's not just making a whole bunch of statements and asking us to kind of think about them and draw connections among them any way that we want to. He is say, I mean, as we were looking at, so I see why it's not the words I thought it was, is I'm still back up in chapter 2. Okay. Um, that's why I was so interested in dia tuto in today's sentence. Because of this, that's really interesting, right? He's telling us something here about the relationship between the false prophets in the world. He's not just saying like, consider false prophets, consider the world, right? Right? Snuggle those two things those two concepts next to each other in your mind and let them work. Like, no, he's making a statement. They, the false prophets, are ectu cosmo. And because of this, they speak ectu cosmo. There's a reason that their speaking is congenial to the world because they're from it. That world, which is the world in which the antichristoi is loose, the anti-anointing and anti-anointed one, the accuser, the panero, the one who's abiding in the world. They're from there instead of from God. Just as the things that they say are breathings from the world instead of breathings from God because they're from there. They talk that way, and the cosmos listens to them. So again, he's saying some things in particular, but what he never quite will do, again, what he sort of refuses to do is to, you know, have you ever, I don't know if you've spent much time, and for your sake, I hope you haven't, because I find it very unpleasant anyway, reading contracts, um, legal contracts, I mean, right? And you know how that that really fun tendency, right? The thing you do at the beginning of a legal contract where you define your terms, right? When I say this in this contract, when I use this word in this contract, it means this. When I use this word, right? I mean, like we spell all this out so that it's perfectly clear, and then I'm going to use that consistently all through the contract, right? That's exactly the way John is not using words here. And if we want that, and we often want that. We want to be like, okay, like I want to be able to assemble, right? I want to add to John's epistle a preliminary paragraph in which I say, okay, so cosmos equals this thing. When he says the world, he always means this thing, right? Um, but that's not how he thinks. That's not how he's working. That's the thing which, if you try to insist on it, you'll 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 get something from this that he's not given you. And that's what I think we need to be sensitive to. Um, an exercise that I do want to do, Scott, and we'll get to it at some point, is looking at the parallel statements, just like the one we glanced at, but remember that with paragraph 6, with the ectu patros and ectu cosmos there, and how that's parallel to the ectu theo and the ectu cosmo here, right? That kind of repetition, that kind of parallel. John's all about the parallelism. He loves the parallel. He loves to balance things against each other. And when you look at the things, the different things that he's put into the two different pans of the scale, right? We can begin to see some patterns, some links, some ways in which he is inviting us to associate these things. And sometimes there does seem to be a kind of a transitive property thing going on, right? Whereas like where this thing, this one item, like A is balanced with B and C is balanced with B. So A and C are linked together, right? Or he'll do like more complicated things like A is is weighed against B, and C is weighed against D, and E is weighed against B. And so therefore, what's the relationship between B and, between like A and D, right? I mean, it's like it gets really complicated. And again, he's not just drawing connector lines. He's not just drawing equal signs. Um, right, that type of equation analysis is exactly what your brain wants to do. Yeah, no, I get it. It's very natural. Yeah, the defining terms thing at the beginning. Yeah. Yeah. Randall points out that legal contract language is a very poor tool for creating poetry. Yes, exactly. And I would also add, I think that poetry is a much better medium for conveying infinity than legal language is. Basically. um that's that's yeah, this is kind of what it comes to. All right, so by the English translation, verse 6 contain we only have one. The good news is we only have one verse left in this paragraph, um which means we're close, we're getting close to full mastery of this paragraph. The bad news is in the English translations, there are 3 sentences in verse 6. Uh, whoever was breaking up the verses got real stingy at the end of this paragraph, it seems. So verse 6 is tremendously huge. So I cannot promise we're going to get through all of verse 6 next time. Um, but oh, look where we begin. We are Ectutheu. Oh, but I'm pre-gaming now. Okay. So next time we will go to verse 6. I know we haven't totally solved the world thing, but I actually feel a lot better about it. Um, I think it is really interesting the way in which we are seeing this increased. We've gotten, I think, a good deal of increased clarity. John's flavor of clarity, by the way, not Paul's and certainly not legal contracts version of clarity, but um, about this cosmos thing, that thing in which the the evil one abides, the anti-anointed one abides, from which the false prophets come and to which the false prophets go. But that's the thing. The world that listens to the false prophets isn't just 100% identical with the world from which the false prophets come. And therein lies something very interesting, I think. And let's see where we go. Um, oh man, we're gonna start gnoskoing things again. Oh yeah. Okay. All right. I can't wait. I can't wait. We're crowning this paragraph by looking back at uh some favorite vocabulary from the first half of the epistle. We're gnoskoing things. We're going to bring in aletheia again. Yeah, aletheia and planes. Oh man, it's been forever since we've had planes. Yeah, awesome, awesome. Okay, okay. There's a lot. There's a lot in verse 6. I think maybe we'll do it. We'll see. We might get through the whole bit. Who knows? All right. Um, thank you everybody for joining me. I feel better about the world. Um, in some ways. I feel worse about the world in other ways. But very good. So we'll see. We're approaching the end of paragraph 12. We'll see if we can get through it and then try to back up a little bit and see if we're understanding this and then how it fits into make sure to go back, having immersed ourselves in this paragraph for so long, we need to glance back at the previous paragraphs to see the whole trajectory that he's going on so that we'll be ready to move forward into paragraph 13. All right. Thanks everybody for joining me, and I'll see you guys again next time. Bye now.